The story of Susan, who gave birth to a child against her husband's will. After the divorce, he pursued her until he was arrested. However, it turned out that the threat still existed. Susan Carter lived in the small town of Bloomfield, Indiana. She worked in a library, lived a quiet life, and thought she had finally found stability when she married Derek. Derek worked as a mechanic in a workshop on the outskirts of town, had a straightforward character, was not too emotional, but considered himself the head of the family. Their marriage lasted almost 3 years, and although there was no deep intimacy between them, everything seemed manageable and predictable. Susan had long wanted a child, but Derek did not share her desire. He said that it was too early, that it was not the right time, that the world was not the same. She decided not to argue, but when she found out about the pregnancy, she decided to keep the child, regardless of his opinion. When she told Derek the news, he was silent for a long time, then left the house for a few days. When he returned, he said that he was not ready for parenthood and that he could not support her in this decision. However, Susan did not give up on the idea of having a baby. The next few months were tense. They hardly spoke. Derek slept in the spare room, spent most of his time in the garage or with friends. Susan felt abandoned, but she focused on her pregnancy. She set up the nursery, read books on caring for babies, and made appointments for medical checkups. Her mother, who lived in another state, called every day but could not come. By the 8th month of her pregnancy, Susan noticed that Derek had become colder. He talked about selling the house, about how life had not worked out, and that she should think about whether she could handle a baby on her own. She assumed that he might leave. But she did not think that he could completely break things off. The day of the birth came. Susan woke up from sharp contractions. She packed her things, called a taxi, and went to the local hospital. They registered her, put her in the ward. Everything was happening quickly, the pain was getting worse, the nurses were preparing her for labor. She hoped that at least at this moment Derek would be there, but he did not appear. The condition was getting worse. The doctor said that the birth could be long and difficult. Everyone in the ward was focused on helping her get through it. The nurses encouraged her, tried to keep her in a state of concentration. She almost did not pay attention to external things, focusing only on her own body, which seemed to be tearing apart from the inside. And then everything was cut short. The door to the delivery room suddenly opened. Derek burst into the room. He was excited, shouted loudly, demanded to stop the labor. The doctors tried to stop him, but he broke through to the bed. His eyes were full of anger. He said that this child would ruin everything. The nurse called security. The doctor tried to isolate the patient, covering her with a screen. Susan looked at him in shock. Her body was exhausted, she hardly understood what was happening, but her heart was beating in her chest as if it wanted to jump out. She could not believe that he dared to come here, at such a moment, and not with support, but with aggression. The security took Derek out of the ward. The entire staff was tense. Someone was calming Susan, others were controlling the equipment. A few minutes after the incident, she lost consciousness. The birth had to be completed urgently. The doctors decided to perform a cesarean section. When Susan came to after the operation, her body was still weak and her mind was foggy. Beside her lay a baby wrapped in a white blanket. The baby slept peacefully, breathing evenly. She could not hold back her tears. Not from pain but from relief that it was all over. She gave birth. Despite everything, despite the fear, despite the pain, despite Derek's visit. The doctors said that the boy was healthy, although he had been born with complications. His weight was within normal limits, his heart was working well. She named him Jacob. The medical staff behaved cautiously, kindly, but she noticed that some of the nurses looked at each other when they entered the ward. The incident with Derek was already being discussed in the hospital. Security had forbidden him from visiting the premises. His name was added to the list of persons with restricted access. But Susan's fear did not disappear. It seemed to her that he would still find a way to appear, to somehow harm her or the baby. The first days after Jacob was born were difficult. She had no experience, and there was no support. She learned everything on her own. How to hold the baby, how to feed, how to respond to crying. The doctors explained, the nurses helped, but at night she was left alone. Her sleep was fragmented, her body ached, but every movement of the baby made her get out of bed, ignoring her fatigue. A few days later she was discharged from the hospital. A friend, a nurse, gave her a ride. She brought her things into the house and said goodbye. The house was empty. Derek had been gone for several days. Some of his things remained, but the atmosphere itself had become cold. She carried the baby into the bedroom she had previously planned to make a nursery and covered him with a blanket. Everything was different from what she had imagined. There was no man holding his hand, no joy or shared surprise at the new life. There was silence, broken by the baby's cries. Susan wrote to her mother that she had given birth, sent a photo. She knew that her mother would not be able to come, she had health problems. But she texted and called every day. It was the only moral support that remained. Friends disappeared. Most of them had not maintained close contact since college, and after Susan chose a quiet life with Derek, social contacts decreased. For the first week after returning home, she hardly left her room. Everything was subordinated to the baby. Diapers, feeding, sleeping, bathing. Sometimes she allowed herself to sit in the kitchen, drink cold coffee and look at the door. It seemed to her that it was about to open and he would return. She was tormented by the question of what would happen next. Would Derek come back? Would he demand something? Would he try to take the baby away? Would he sign the divorce? On the 10th day, she received a summons from the court. Derek filed for divorce. She stared at the documents for a long time, not knowing how to react. It stated that he did not recognize himself as the father, did not want to participate in raising the child, did not claim the property. Legally, he completely renounced any responsibilities. She signed without thinking. The very next week, the court ruled that the child would stay with her, and Derek would not bear any responsibility. She felt better. Now she was officially a single mother. Without support, but without threats. However, the nightly anxieties did not disappear. She woke up at every rustle, checked the windows, checked the locks. She was still afraid that Derek would return. But he did not return. He was silent. He disappeared completely. No one knew where he was. The first cold nights came. She heated the nursery, hid Jacob under warm blankets. In the morning she cooked porridge, read books about child development, learned to be a father and a mother at the same time. In the evening she made plans to find a part-time job. She didn't have much money, and now everything, including utility bills, was on her. The church helped her several times. They brought groceries, diapers, things for the baby. She didn't ask, but someone remembered her from the hospital's patient list, and the volunteers came on their own. A month passed. Jacob began to smile. These little moments became the most precious for Susan. She didn't think about the past. She didn't look for Derek. All that mattered was the baby who breathed, grew, enlivened every day of her existence. 2 months after Jacob was born, Susan's life gradually took on a new rhythm. She learned to plan her day so that she had at least a few hours to rest. The baby was growing healthy, although he often cried at night. She read that this was normal, and learned to recognize the reasons: hunger, colic, temperature changes. Learning by doing became a habit. She had no right to be tired, could not get sick, had no one to share responsibility with. All her actions were subordinated to survival, hers and the child's. To keep up with the bills, she started working from home. An acquaintance from the library advised her to do online text editing. It was a small salary, but she took on many orders and did everything at night, when the child was sleeping. Gradually, she got into a rhythm: during the day, the child; at night, work. There was only enough money for the most necessary. But she did not complain. The house was starting to fall apart. The roof leaked after rain, the bathroom heater worked intermittently, the old refrigerator would occasionally shut down. She tried to maintain everything as best she could. She took out the trash with a stroller, did the laundry by hand, and changed the light bulbs. The neighbors didn't interfere. In this area, most of the residents were elderly or single. Everyone lived their lives without showing any particular interest. One day she received a letter from the bank. It turned out that Derek had once taken out a loan on the house, and although he had filed for divorce, the debt had not disappeared. She didn't understand the legal intricacies, but it turned out that she was partially responsible for the debt. The letter mentioned the possible confiscation of the property if she didn't make the monthly payments. Susan was confused. She didn't know what to do next. She contacted a lawyer, who agreed to help without a down payment. He explained that the case could be appealed, but it was a long process. In the meantime, she had to cut back even more. She stopped buying unnecessary products, switched to cheaper diapers, and sold some of Derek's belongings online. His old motorcycle, a set of tools, even a few pieces of furniture. It helped her get by. Jacob was growing up. By the 3rd month, he was already recognizing her face and responding to her voice. She carried him around the house, singing him lullabies, making up games. In between work and chores, she studied books on child psychology because she didn't want to make any mistakes. Her anxiety was gradually replaced by confidence. One day, when she was taking out the trash, she saw a letter on the doorstep. There was no return address. Inside was a piece of paper with printed text. It said that Derek wanted to come back, that he had changed his mind, that he wanted to see his son, that she couldn't live with what had happened. There was no signature, but the style and phrases were characteristic. She understood that it was from him. This letter brought her back to a state of anxiety. She didn't answer. He didn't leave a number or an address. But now she knew he hadn't disappeared. He was somewhere nearby. She began to close the door more often, check the windows, sleep with the phone in her hands. She didn't want Derek to come back. She was afraid that he would want to influence the child, their life. She saw him as a threat. At night she dreamed of him bursting into the hospital again, screaming, grabbing her arms. She woke up screaming, looking around, checking the crib. Jacob slept peacefully, not realizing that his mother was holding her hands on his stomach, trying to calm the tremors. A few more weeks passed. She turned to the police with a request for a restraining order. She was told that without a direct threat or repeated contact, she could do nothing. Only if he appeared would she act. This disappointed her. She realized that the system only protected her after something happened. She made copies of the letter, hid them in various places. She left the original in a file folder. She also updated the locks, bought a cheap CCTV camera, and installed it above the front door. After that, the nights became a little quieter. She felt more protected. Her life became clearly structured: day, taking care of Jacob; night, work; evening, checking the door; morning, checking the camera. She accepted this routine. It was her way of maintaining control. And although the fear did not go away, she no longer felt helpless. She knew what to do if danger appeared on the doorstep again. Winter had come. Bloomfield was covered in snow. The temperature dropped sharply, the roads were covered with a crust of ice. Susan dressed Jacob in several layers of clothing. Each time before going out she checked all the locks, the house, and the schedule. She only went out to the mailbox and sometimes to the nearest grocery store when she ran out of food. Mostly she ordered food through volunteer initiatives or aid programs. Some organizations began to send baby food, formula, baby items. All her efforts were aimed at stability. Jacob grew a few centimeters, could now hold his head up on his own, sometimes made joyful sounds, grabbed his mother's fingers, smiled. Susan held on to these moments. They reminded her that life had meaning, that her struggle was not in vain. The work became increasingly difficult. The word editing tasks were more complex, the clients demanded speed. She often fell asleep at her laptop, woke up with a headache, and answered emails in a hurry. Her eyesight began to deteriorate, but she had no time to see a doctor. She hadn't even had time to get health insurance. She had only been pregnant for a few months, and her baby was taking up all her time. When she received another letter, this time handwritten, she knew immediately that it was from Derek again. He said he had seen her in town, that he was sad, that he wanted to see his son. He wasn't threatening, but every sentence had the flavor of an intrusion. Susan didn't respond. She filed a second police report. This time, she included copies of the letters and the camera footage. The officer looked everything over, promised to enter the information into the system, but said that they would only take action after physical contact or a direct threat. Susan realized that the legal system was only on her side conditionally. She withdrew even more tightly into herself. She began waking up even earlier, getting up before dawn to get some work done while the baby slept. In the evenings, she would cook meals for several days in advance so as not to go out again. She stopped even answering her mother's messages, because she felt that every word was an expenditure of energy that would be better saved for the child. One morning she discovered that the door handle was damaged. Someone had tried to open it. The lock remained intact, but the dent was noticeable. The camera had not recorded anything that night. The battery had died, and she had not had time to replace it. It was like a blow. She had lost another support, technological. Now she could not know who exactly was coming. Maybe Derek. Maybe a random passerby. But instinct said it was him. She called a locksmith, replaced the lock, and immediately bought a new camera with a self-powered battery. She filed a police report again. This time, she left detailed photos. Her case was officially registered as a potential threat. But she was not given any guarantees. She had to rely only on herself. All this worsened her emotional state. She became withdrawn, avoided calls, did not watch TV, did not open social networks. Everything that happened in the world did not concern her. She lived in a small house with her child, in her own regime, with her own fear and her own responsibilities. However, every time she took Jacob in her arms and he looked at her with his bright eyes, she felt strength. He was an extension of her. Her choice. She knew that she had to go through all this so that he would grow up safe, healthy, strong. She would not let the past come back and destroy their future. In the middle of winter, she decided to transform one of the rooms into a home office. She moved Jacob's crib closer to the window, set up her old laptop on a different table, and bought a cheap lamp. It was a symbol of her determination to not give up, even when everything seemed against her. The night after the rearrangement was complete, she went to bed without anxiety for the first time in months. And although she woke up to Jacob crying, she felt a little calmer. She hadn't won, but she was still holding on. Spring brought a little warmth and new challenges. Jacob began to crawl. Susan watched him every day as he tried to reach a toy, a book, or just his mother's leg. He began to grab everything, pull it into his mouth, fall, roll over. She had to be there all the time. Every little thing became a danger: charging cables, cups, open drawers. She gradually transformed the house into a safe space, taping up corners, removing unnecessary items, plugging in all the outlets. The work became even more difficult. Now she could only work at night or during the baby's short daytime naps. She kept herself in shape with coffee, but her heart often beat faster than usual, and she began to feel pain in her chest. She knew the exhaustion was building, but she had no choice. She had to endure it. Derek had stopped writing. Months had passed without any sign. The camera above the door had recorded nothing suspicious. The police had not contacted him either. At first, Susan thought he had left them alone. But then she began to suspect that he was waiting. That he had chosen a different strategy, to retreat and return later. During this period, she began to read again. Books that had been on the shelves for years were opening up in new ways. She read the stories of other women who had raised children alone. Stories of survival, of struggle, of unexpected victories. She wasn't looking for inspiration, she was looking for confirmation that her path wasn't unique. That others had been through something similar and persevered. Susan also started keeping a journal. In it, she recorded not only events but also her feelings. Her handwriting was nervous, the lines slanted, but real words appeared on the pages: fear, hope, fatigue, anger. She didn't plan on sharing this with anyone. It was a way to keep from breaking down. One morning she noticed a car parked behind the house. An old pickup truck, dark blue, with tinted windows. It had no license plates on the front. The car was standing still. 15 minutes later she went to look, it was gone. This happened several more times during the week. After that, she contacted the police again, this time more insistently. She provided photos she had managed to take from the window. They accepted her report, but they said the car was not suspicious, maybe someone was just visiting the neighbors. She didn't believe it. She knew it was Derek. Or someone from his entourage. She increased her security again. She installed a second camera, ordered a whistle with a siren, kept it with her even at home. She checked the door every evening, woke up every night to every sound. But she didn't allow herself to panic. Jacob needed her. He was already starting to say his first syllables, pulling his hands to his mother's face, and rejoicing when she laughed. She knew that her emotions were felt by the baby, so she tried to control herself. She practiced speaking calmly, even when her heart was pounding. A friend from the library she hadn't seen in a while had sent her a message offering a free course for single mothers. It was an opportunity to improve her online writing skills. Susan decided to give it a try. The course lasted 3 weeks, and she took it at night, reading the materials on her phone. After it was over, she was offered a small contract for technical editing. It was a small change, but it became a symbol she was moving forward. When Jacob was 8 months old, she felt that for the first time since his birth, he had truly bonded with her. He began to cry when she left, even for a few minutes, and laughed happily when she returned. This connection was not only biological, it was emotional. This gave her even more determination. One day she spotted the car again. This time she took a short video. An hour later, someone rang the doorbell, but when she looked out, no one was there. She immediately called the police. The patrol arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the area but found nothing. However, they registered another incident. She hardly slept for several nights after that. She sat by the window, holding the baby in her arms, looking out into the darkness. She felt that some kind of climax was approaching. That someone was preparing to take the next step. But she was ready. She would not be scared. She would not give up. She had already proven to herself that she was stronger than pain, fear, and fatigue. A few weeks after the last police call, Susan's life entered a new phase. Jacob began to walk. Uncertainly, unsteadily, but independently. His first steps were an event she would remember forever. She stood across from him on the carpet, holding a toy, and he took a few firm steps, falling on the last one. She couldn't hold back her tears. There was no defeat. In that fall, only progress. From that moment on, her days became even more hectic. The toddler walked all over the house, pulling things, looking into closets. She had to move furniture, install door guards, double-check all the outlets. Her life consisted of work, supervising the child, cooking, and even more supervision. But she was used to it. Each new day became an extension of her choice to be strong. She decided to change her appearance. She cut her hair, dyed it dark, and replaced her old clothes with basic sportswear. It wasn't just a desire for protection, it was a gesture of renewal. She was leaving behind the image of the woman Derek knew. She was becoming different, independent, unknown to him. In mid-March, she received a message from the lawyer she had once consulted for the article. He offered to provide a free consultation if she still had problems with the stalking. She agreed. A few days later, they spoke via video call. The lawyer explained that based on all the police reports and evidence in the form of photos and videos, she had grounds to file for a restraining order. She immediately agreed. A few weeks later, the case went to court. Derek was given a formal warning. He was forbidden to come within 300 feet of Susan's home or workplace. The decision didn't guarantee complete safety, but it was an important legal barrier. She breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Jacob was growing up. He was already saying a few words, trying to sing alone with his mother, laughing at cartoons. She taught him new things every day: how to hold a spoon, how to say the name of a color, how to make a thank you gesture. They were little things, but each of them was a step towards his future. And she knew that her child was growing up in an environment where he was accepted, loved, and protected. One evening, as Jacob was falling asleep, she heard a noise in the backyard. She didn't turn on the lights, she didn't panic. She went to the window and turned on the camera on her phone. There was a man standing in the corner. His face was not visible, but his posture and clothing resembled Derek. She immediately called the police. A patrol car arrived a few minutes later. They didn't find anyone, but the cameras captured the image. This time, it was clear. The police opened a case of violation of the restraining order. Her lawyer joined the case. This was no longer a simple intervention, it had become a crime. She felt no fear. She felt protected by the law, by documents, by actions. For the first time in many months, she allowed herself to trust the system. When she told her mother about the situation, she came to visit her for a few days. They hadn't seen each other since the birth. Susan was nervous at first, but the meeting went smoothly. Her mother hugged her grandson, helped with the cleaning, and made dinner. For the first time in a long time, Susan was able to take a nap during the day. It was an unusual but pleasant experience, sharing the burden. Her mother stayed for a week. Before she left, she had said she would be willing to help more often if Susan needed it. And although Susan was used to doing everything herself, she agreed. The realization that helping did not mean weakness was an important step. When the case against Derek became public, he contacted Susan's lawyer himself. He said he wanted to avoid a trial and would stop all attempts at contact. She was given an official statement signed by him. She didn't believe the words, but the document became another wall between them. And that was enough. At the beginning of the summer, she decided to apply for a scholarship, an online graphic design program. She needed a new profession that would be more profitable. 3 weeks later, she was told that her application had been approved. She would receive free tuition for 6 months. She cried, holding Jacob in her arms. For the first time in a long time, she saw more than just day after day, she saw the horizon. And although he was still far away, she knew that he would reach him. The summer seemed hot. Jacob was already confidently running around the apartment. Sometimes falling, laughing, sometimes screaming from exhaustion. Susan only had time to make sure that he didn't run into the kitchen or open the closet door. She began to plan for the future, the day when she would be able to send Jacob to kindergarten and return to full-time work. Her graphic design courses were progressing well. She received certificates in basic skills, began drawing simple logos, taking small freelance requests. The income was still minimal, but she knew that this was the beginning. Changes had occurred in the yard near her house, the neighbors had moved out, and new residents had moved in to take their place. Susan met them, a young couple. They had a girl a little older than Jacob. The children sometimes played together. The girl's mother suggested that they join forces to leave the children with one of them for a few hours. This allowed Susan to work more often without interruption. The beginning of August was calm. All signs of danger disappeared. Derek did not appear. The police did not send news. No one called. Life became routine. Jacob woke up early, they had breakfast, walked in the park, came home, she worked, then dinner, bath, bedtime story. Night. And morning again. Every day was the same, but it was safe. One day, when she returned from the store with Jacob, she noticed an envelope on the doorstep. There was no text in it. Only one photo. Old, blurry, but clearly visible, when she was still pregnant, standing in line at the pharmacy. The photo was taken from afar. She looked around. The yard was empty. She immediately contacted the police. She was promised to check the cameras that cover the area nearby. But within a few days, they responded no suspicious activity had been Detected. The photo might have been old. But Susan knew it was a message. A silent reminder that someone was watching. She became more attentive again. She checked all the doors, windows, locks. She kept a whistle and a gas can with her. She stopped leaving Jacob with anyone else. All walks were only during the day, only on crowded streets. But the anxiety did not leave her. In mid-September she woke up early. She did not know why, a feeling of cold, or some kind of sound. She went into the hallway and noticed the front door was open. Her heart beat faster. She rushed into the bedroom. Jacob was sleeping. She locked the door from the inside and called the police. They arrived in 20 minutes. No one had broken the locks. There were no traces. But the fact remained: the door was open. This made her act more decisively. She rented a new apartment in a different area, with a guard at the entrance, with cameras on all floors. Within a week she moved. She also changed her phone number. She did not inform anyone except her mother. The new place was quiet. Jacob loved the new yard. She arranged the furniture differently. For the first time in a long time she began to feel comfortable. But it didn't last long. One evening she heard footsteps in the hallway. They were familiar. Heavy. Slow. She looked at the camera. No one was standing at the door, but she knew he was somewhere nearby. A few hours later, an email with no subject arrived in her email. In the attachment was another photo. Jacob on the playground, the day before. The photo was taken from behind a tree. This time she didn't go to the police. She made copies of all the pictures, letters, and event logs from the cameras, organized everything into one file. Then she sat down, wrote a short letter, attached it to all the materials, and sent it to a journalist she knew who had once written about the harassment of women. A week later, an article appeared on one of the major news sites. Completely anonymous. With different names, but with all the details. The article gained publicity. Less than 2 days later, another letter arrived in the editorial office, a threat signed by Derek. He was arrested. The next day, he was silent at the trial. Susan didn't show up. She didn't want to see him anymore. He was sentenced to a year of probation and a mandatory no-contact order. He had to go through a psychological program. But for her, the sentence wasn't the end. She knew the threat hadn't completely disappeared. A few more months passed. The winter seemed snowy. Jacob learned to speak in full sentences. She continued her studies, got her first regular clients. Her income became more stable. She felt that everything was starting to come together. The future seemed real. But one day, returning from a walk, she opened the door and saw someone was in the room. On the table was a toy that she had definitely left in the nursery. The window was slightly open. The smell of someone else's perfume was in the air. No note. No cameras had recorded the visit. She had checked every door. No lock had been broken. And then she knew it wasn't Derek. Someone else knew about everything. Someone she hadn't seen. Someone who had been closer than she thought all along. Someone who had been waiting for her to relax. And that moment had come. Susan took Jacob in her arms, left the house, hailed a cab, and told the driver to drive straight. She didn't know where.